This is Cassie McSherry with Assurity Title, everybody. Cassie, take it over.
I feel incredibly blessed to be invited to participate with this morning. I love a good coffee morning Friday chat. Yes, my name is Cassie McSherry. I'm one of the owners of Assurity Title here in Tampa. We're a family-owned and operated growing business. I've been incredibly blessed. We've been open for about 4 years and sit over in the Wilski Professional Complex, close to Linebaugh and the Veterans Expressway. But my partner in life and title work is my husband, who's been in title in the Tampa Bay area for like over 20 years. So when he decided back in March of 2020 that he wanted to go out on his own, I decided to leave that education career that I had been in, where I met Kelly Downing. We did teach together, to help my husband. I was initially just going to take 1 year off and just help him get his business started. And then I kind of like the working for myself, and I kind of like making a little more money than I did as a teacher. So that's kind of how my title agent's career began. And now we just, I do a lot of closings for them, but now I'm working, or for us, but now it's doing some marketing, supporting agents in a more supportive role in that way. So,
do you have any learning experiences that have come up on your transactions that would be helpful for the agents to know?
Yes, I think it's incredibly important for real estate agents to know. One, I would never be involved ever receiving any wire payoff information from anyone anywhere. I can tell you in the title side, there's an uptick in mortgage payoff fraud right now. A title agent who shares my same underwriter and same bank just recently sent out hundreds of thousands of dollars to a fraudulent payoff. So
how does it work usually? How does when you wire the funds?
It was particular to one mortgage company or servicer, let me say, Mr. Cooper. The way they generate their payoffs is a little different in that the payoff information is different on every transaction. It's transaction specific, so it's kind of hard to see a difference. We have taken steps in our company. We use a platform called Closing Lock. We pay a pretty penny for and so that allows us to share information back and forth, private personal information. It also allows us to verify payoff information is accurate. In doing that recently, just since January 1, we've caught 3 fraudulent sellers who were trying to sell property that they did not have the right to sell. They were completely fraudulent. One gentleman had gone so far as to create an ID. That's another thing that this Closing Lock platform assists us with. So our clients, buyers and sellers, they input their ID, and the Closing Lock platform identifies, based on state mandates for each of the 50 states, whether it's a valid ID. And so, especially for us, even though we only do transactions in the state of Florida, as you can imagine, we have buyers and sellers from all over the country. So that's one way that helps us validate, because I would argue that one of our most very important roles is that when we're closing a transaction, that the person selling the property has the right to do so, right? That they
is it usually with like land that comes up versus like a house?
Yeah. Out of those 3 that I spoke to you, 2 of them were vacant land, which is huge in the state of Florida now. And the third one was a home. It had been kind of an abandoned home. So, but it's just that there's due diligence on all sides. So from the agent side, right, when you're making a contract with people, and it just so happened that those 3 deals were all investor deals. Okay, so we do a lot of novation agreements and assignment contracts and double closes, but in all 3 of those cases, they were investor deals where an investor kind of identifies a transaction, but then it's the title company who's really on the hook to vet out whether these people really are who they say they are.
So the assignment of contracts, generally those are cash deals where the buyer's buying it on those generally?
Generally, yes. They're cash transactions on the AB side. So let's imagine it's an ABBC contract, right? Sometimes we'll get a lender on the BC side, typically hard money lenders, typically, or, like investment, people will invest in someone to do like a flip.
Yeah, I used to always tell people that we couldn't do it if it was like an assignment of contract where the person didn't actually close, and then you write a new purchase contract and the buyer do it. But I have I went to the underwriters again, and if it's a conventional loan, and depending on how the title work is done, if it shows like the chain of title, it is potentially possible. So I haven't closed any like that yet, but potentially.
So you have assignment of contracts and then you have double closes, right? So the AB closes first, but within our office on the same day or however, the AB side of the transaction closes. Now the B becomes the seller on the BC side. So a lot of times we can see funding on that side where, traditional lending. We don't see traditional lending on assignment contracts.
I meant what you were talking about, not the assignment. Yeah. So like,
yeah,
where they close the same day. And again, I don't really advertise it until I've closed one once. So.
Right. And I mean, because they almost act as two completely different transactions. I believe actually Julia Wright and I were in a situation where we had closed that a transaction like that. And what happens though is if things don't move really smoothly, right? So if you have, and we were only handling the AB side, and the buyer was using a separate title company for the BC side, which is fine. But what happens is if you're using money from AB and it's got to go over, or they were using money from BC to fund AB, and then that deal got delayed, well, it gets a little hairy. Yeah. So I would definitely make sure that you vet that out too, and, make sure that you're aware as an agent exactly what's going on. Because cash is cash until it's not, you know what I mean? They're like, oh, it's a cash transaction, but it's really when you're waiting for funding from the other side to fund this one cash. So it gets a little, you got to be pretty savvy. And I do know a lot of real estate agents that just won't even bother to work with investor clients because it gets so tricky, wholesalers and that type of.
On the one where you said you had a fraudulent seller. So like, so an agent that you work with list a property for sale, they met with the fraudulent seller and listed
it was an investor. It was an investor that we work with often. And that's another thing you should know too. A lot of these investors are not based out of Florida. Two investors that we work with often are based out of Arizona. So they come, they're not here. They identify properties, they'll have people, and then they kind of hook up the seller with the, potential buyer. And then we're given the job to identify, to close the transaction. Well, what we found was who the investor had identified as the seller did not own the property. It wasn't their property to sell. So, thank God we did our due diligence on our side, because the person who actually owned that last vacant land, where we actually received like fraudulent identification, fraudulent, contact information, everything, was a real person. And this fraudulent seller had identified him, who lived in Georgia, had his address, had his place of work, had taken a picture from LinkedIn to create the ID that he had submitted. And thank God, the system that we have in place just identified it as fraud all the way around with the ID. Sometimes things on the ID will, alert us to pay close attention to. Typically, if someone got a replacement ID, then the issue date doesn't match what's on the ID. So those types of things throw it off, but that's just one thing.
So would they have had a fake bank account set up?
Oh yeah.
Or like, you would have had to send it to like their PayPal account or Venmo account or something like that?
We never send to PayPal or Venmo or any of that. So I can't speak to what other title companies do, but no, they absolutely would have had a bank account set up in an account in his name. And what was scary is they had his they had a social. So in my system, when they populate, when they put in the social, we only see the last 4 digits of it, because that's not really information we need from our side, the title side. So he had somehow received this man, at least the last 4 digits of this man's social security number as well, because that did match the person, the last 4 that we. So it's very scary. You just have to be, diligent. You have to be on the phone with people yourselves. I mean, I'm surprised sometimes at how many agents don't really interact with the client directly sometimes, like they'll secure the contract. They're like a buyer's agent for somebody, but like I said, in those other 3, you want to make sure you know who you're dealing with as well. And
So,
unfortunately,
on the house that was fraudulent, how did that work? Did an agent actually have that listed?
yes. An agent, well, yes. And that one, but that didn't take long for us to find out. I mean, that we found out that immediately. And I'm not exactly, well, it was a probate issue too. So that gets a little tricky, right? Because, it's the estate. So when you're getting into the legal documents and all of that, not everything is always up to date on the public side initially if something is going through probate, right? So as an agent, you can't always depend on that, but you want to make sure you have a really good title company that does, whoever your closing agent is. And it was a relative trying to act like the person who had the rights to sell the property.
So is there something that an agent can do to prevent, like in the event that, so I have a file right now. It's supposed to close on the 26th of April. Buyer writes a contract. Realtor then finds out after the contract's written that there's a probate issue with the title. So is there and that has happened several times where it comes up during the process and the listing agent had no idea. So is there something they can do to prevent that?
It's unfortunate because most buyers and sellers, they don't understand how the process works, right? Like someone will say, and that's a lot of legalese that, they just think that their parents passed, so the house naturally passes to them, or they'll think, well, my parents had a will. Well, a will still, it has to go through an interpretation, right? From a judge, appoints it, does homestead summary, all of those processes. It's not immediate. So, I would love to actually do like a training for agents on that sort of stuff, because different situations happen and they're all kind of independent. I mean, you can speak generally, but, we've had several clients die, the seller die, right? So the daughter was the POA, the mom dies. They don't understand that with the mom, the POA also dies, right? So she thinks that the house, and she was a sole heir, right? Well, the house is going to be mine, she says, but it still has to go through that process. And there's different ways to handle that too. Like with the estate, right? If it's a whole estate situation, a judge can go ahead and agree for a property to go ahead and be sold and the money held in the estate, right? So it's kind of tying up the affairs, the one who's passed. So it just depends on, and the whole process for, it can be lengthy. Sometimes it's like 5 to 6 months if it's like a full, probate issue. So I would strongly suggest that agents have a good referral partner with a probate attorney as well. Probate attorney, divorce attorney, have people that you have really good relationships with, so that if you're in a situation like that where someone's passed, you want someone who's going to pick up your client in a situation that's really tough, right? They just lost their mom, that's going to be hands-on, or at least that's my approach. I don't want to just refer a client. Like I said, we've had 6 sellers pass. So we've been in that situation where, you know.
The one thing that comes up with our buyers, like that are renting and they want to buy, they're like, hey, when can I put my notice in with my apartment complex? Or the worst part is when they don't say anything and they do it. I was like, well, listen, I was like, at least do the home inspection, get the loan approval, get the appraisal done. I go, however, what I did when I bought my house, I waited till the day I closed to tell my landlord. I go, because I've had a seller die once during a transaction, and one just actually died on another transaction. So that's 2 times in 21 years. But what happens if the seller dies? Like you're saying, like that could delay things 5 months and then you're homeless, right?
Yes, it will. And I mean, I've learned so much in the 4 years too, right? The very first seller that we had passed, she had no children. Her husband was deceased. She was an only child, her husband an only child, but they still had to go through the process. And it was the neighbor who was the POA. So when she passed away, they moved her into assisted living. When she passed away, it went through the whole process and that deal came back to us, but it took about 6 months and the neighbor did get the rights to the property. At that point, though, the buyer was still holding on, hoping, again, when someone dies, the contract dies too, right? The contract isn't upholding anymore because the person that signed it is no longer alive.
What happens to the husband and wife that are the owners and one of them dies? Is it the same situation?
So it depends on how the house is titled. And this is important too, right? So we know in the state of Florida, homestead protections are in place on spousal homes, on homesteaded properties, right? So if the house is only in the husband's name, okay, this happens often, right? Someone buys a house, they get married, and it's titled just in his name. Let's say he passes. It still has to go through the process. Yes, the wife will get the house. Yes, she will have rights to the property, but it still has to go through the process where it's deeded to her. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So we get a lot of questions about that often from agents. Same thing. The husband bought the house single, they got married, now they're divorced. The wife still has to sign over her rights to the property through because she has rights, even though in the deed it says him single. We know that the marital agreement, when they got married, she has rights. So she has to relinquish those rights typically through a quitclaim deed when she leaves before he can do something with the property again. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
How long does it usually take for a quitclaim deed?
Quitclaim deeds are quick and easy. Now, my office, we don't have an attorney, so we're not an attorney title agency on purpose. Like, we want to be in the business of title insurance. That's what I actually am, a title insurance agent. So in the issuing of a title insurance policy, I can draft legal documents such as quitclaim deeds, satisfactions of mortgages, promissory notes, all of those things if I'm issuing a title policy. So in the situation where someone the quitclaim deed, then I have a referral partner, an attorney, a real estate attorney who I refer that out to. But you can do it yourself. I mean, it's $10 to record it with the county, and they're not particularly challenging to draft. You just want to make sure that they're drafted correctly. Marital status, correct legal description, certain things need to be in there, whether it's homestead, non-homestead, grantee, grantor, information is correct as well. But a quitclaim deed you can do in a day. I mean, you sign it, have it recorded. It has to be signed between 2 witnesses and notarized.
There was a question regarding title insurance. It says, does title insurance cover the fraudulent issues?
Yes. Title insurance would cover the fraudulent issues when they close, if it was not caught. Absolutely. So I have a property actually that's closing today that there's been a delay in the closing. We were supposed to close it last Tuesday, and it's just delayed for a number of reasons. Not any of it's on the buy side, but since that closing got delayed, there's been a judgment filed on the husband of this property of $100,000. So what we do, and most good title agents do, they do what is called a title update. On the day of closing, we have our searcher look in public records again to make sure nothing new has been filed. Well, that new judgment had been filed on his property April 11th or 12th, but like last week. If we had closed and not done a title update, that would have been $100,000. That would have been a title claim against our insurance and would have protected the buyer against that claim of lien.
Now, if it would have popped up a week after the closing, that's different, correct?
If it had been filed a week after. If it had been filed a week after, though, it wouldn't have attached to the property because the property would no longer have been in that person's name. It couldn't have attached to the property.
I guess that's another reason to tell the buyers, like, hey, I had a seller pass away once, and I have a transaction right now where the seller IRS lien popped up.
Oh.
And they're having to wait for the payoff to come from the IRS. The IRS wouldn't fax it. They'll only mail it. And they said 10 to 15 business days.
Yep. And the IRS will always get their money. Those never go away. Those IRS liens. So there's certain liens that are, if it's your homestead property, you can do a homestead affidavit. And there's some protections in place, credit card, certain types of liens. But, yeah, federal tax liens, they attach every time to everything, and Uncle Sam will get his money. Absolutely. And they do. You're absolutely right. They do not fact. It's a lengthy process to get payoff from the IRS.
So when the agent's taking a listing, like one of our questions on our loan application, like, are you past doing any federal debt? So that'd probably be a good idea for an agent when they're taking a listing. Hey, by the way, do you have any outstanding judgments against you? Do you have any IRS, liens, or I even say, do you owe any back taxes?
Absolutely. Now that should come up in a title search, though. If there's an outstanding federal tax lien, that's going to show up in a title search, and you should have a title search back in 3 to 4 days, max. Definitely. I mean, max 4 days. And the title agent should know exactly what's attached to that property and start knocking it out right then.
Do you only do the title search once it's once the listing is under contract, or do listing agents have you start working on it beforehand?
We will do whatever our agent requests. So we often have agents say, I feel like something's just not right. Will you pull a title search for me on this property just to make sure? And we'll do it. No problem at all.
Okay.
No cost to the agent either. So whether we get the deal or not, we don't charge them for that. It's a courtesy. And then of course, if we get the contract, then we just ask for an update in the title commitment when the contract actually opens. And then we have that's when the clicker starts, from our side. But yes, we'll do title update or title searches and municipal lien searches too. You have to be really careful for example, Pinellas County. You don't see a lot of HOAs or CDDs in Pinellas, but every one of those municipalities act almost like an HOA with their code enforcement liens and violations and stuff. So that's important too. If you're getting a property and where you think that there might be code enforcement or something like that going on, you want to pull that as soon as possible too. Now, our office pulls everything the day the contract opens. We want to know exactly, and different agencies have different ways of doing things, and that's fine. But we pull everything in the beginning because I want to know from day one what is on title, what's on the lien searches, as well as HOA, estoppels. We had a property that was in foreclosure by the HOA for $1,500 worth of HOA payments. $1,500, and they had filed foreclosure. I mean, we want to know. So our approach is a little different. We don't care. We'd rather ask for an update later than wait and pull an estoppel 2 weeks before closing and then find out that there's something, terrible on there, because you just don't know sometimes.
I think a lot of title companies just do the estoppel right prior to closing, right?
Most of them do, and that's not our. So by law, they have to give you an update. As long as I ask for an update within 30 days, then they have to give it to me free of charge to the client.
Oh, wow.
Right. So why wouldn't I order it on day one? If I'm closing in 6 weeks, I still get in a stop line. I know exactly what's going on. I ask for an update right before, and then it's still good for the next 2 weeks. So in some HOA communities, they don't have to answer you. Title agents, I play really nice with HOA management companies and stuff, because they are under zero obligation to speak to a realtor or a title company or anybody but their client who owns the property. And then they have to respond to an estoppel order by law. That's it. That's, so you want to be really nice and try to make friends.
That's awesome information, because I had a buyer that just went to contract on a condo, and the condo fee's $850 a month. She goes, well, how will I know if I have to pay for 2 or 3 months of condo dues? I was like, well, lots of title companies do it just prior to closing. So I hate to say, like, it may be just prior to closing when we find that out. So that's awesome. You guys do that.
No, we do that right away. Important too, and you probably, Sean, some of these clients with HOA dues can put them out of a loan sometimes. You know what I mean? Like all that information, and it doesn't always match. I mean, I know there's an HOA disclosure that comes with the contract and stuff, but those figures don't always match. True. Capital contributions for these HOAs too, those can be really chunky fees sometimes,
Yeah, I had one that was like $3,000.
Yeah, we just had one $3,500, and the HOA dues are only like $395. So when you see that, you're like, gosh, $2,500 is a lot for a capital contribution,
Yeah, I just had an estoppel on a condo last month. It was a buyer, and the condo disclosure said, oh, it's what was it, 100 and we'll just say 160 a month. And no, as of this year, it went up by another $120. And here we are, and it was a cash deal, closed in 2 weeks. So it was a really fast thing, and we had to decide. So we were able to get them to at least credit us for the year difference. But next year they're going to be paying that full amount. So it's huge, because the woman's like, oh, we didn't know it went up. I'm like, you were warned, you were told, the seller was told, condo fees just don't go up. There's a process. So anyway, it's a big deal right now with condos with all the assessments and everything.
Well, that's great that you negotiated them to pay that difference out. Title never goes by what's on the HOA disclosure in the contracts, because we're down to the apple,
Yeah.
So
Thank you, Cassie. We're so excited to have you in here today and rotation for next month.